Hello, good morning. Hello to everyone, and welcome to our second Games webinar, which is around carbon and environmental footprint calculations for sports events. Today, we've got two really special guests who will talk us through their experiences with carbon and environmental footprinting for sports events. First up, we have Camilla Facheris, who is a life cycle analysis expert at the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies, and Kai Landwehr is corporate marketing head at myclimate. My name is Matthew Campelli. I'm the sustainability partner at Touchline, and I'll be your moderator for the webinar today. So during this webinar, there'll be a couple of learning outcomes. The first one is about how we can apply the life cycle assessment methodology to sports events. Then we'll find out a little bit about what ISO 14064 standard is and how it's applied to measuring carbon emissions and other aspects of the environmental footprint. And then we'll look at some practical steps to start measurement. Before we begin, a very quick word about the Games project, which is an Erasmus Plus funded project through the European Union, which involves a number of partners, including the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies and sports partners, which include World Athletics, the International Biathlon Union, the International Floorball Federation, the Swedish Floorball Federation, and Touchline, the dissemination partner for whom I represent. We've got 5 key objectives in the Games project. The first one is to raise awareness and increase the adoption of climate change mitigation practices by key sports actors. Then we're analysing the current climate change governance and management models adopted in athletics, biathlon and floorball, and to help them develop a path towards decarbonisation. Then we're looking at this to see how we can support the 3 sports with strategic objectives, programmes and operational frameworks. And finally, looking at how we can develop training modules like this one here to improve the environmental knowledge and awareness of sports organisation employees and supporters, and how crucially how we can leverage the popularity of these sports to increase environmental awareness. Today's webinar is about life cycle analysis. Please, this is an interactive webinar, so if you have any questions, please feel free to put your questions either in the Q&A chat and the comments box, and I'll go through as many questions as I can at the end of the webinar. But now, without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Camilla Facheris, who will be our first speaker. Camilla, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. Good morning, everybody. I share my screen with the presentation. You can see the presentation now. Yes,
Perfect.
I'm good. Okay,
Perfect.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. I'm Camilla Facheris. I am a CA expert at Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies, and today I will introduce you to the life cycle assessment, or LCA, and the product environmental footprint methodology, which is an methodology or an LCA methodology. So we introduce you the most important characteristic of life cycle assessment and the PEF methodology. And then I will introduce you an environmental footprint study applied to sporting events. First of all, I will show you which kind of data need for the application of environmental footprint to a sporting event. And then I will show you some result of an application of an LCA to a multi-days sporting event. So let's start with the introduction to LCA. What is an LCA, an life cycle assessment? The LCA is a procedure for assessing, according to defined scientific criteria, the environmental footprint associated with all the stages of a life cycle of a product or a service, and with multiple relevant environmental aspects. So LCA is a multi-criteria analysis, and I will show you later why and what does it mean that LCA is a multi-criteria analysis. But now, as I said in this statement, the LCA analysis is a procedure to calculate the environmental footprint of product or service according to defining the scientific criteria. This means that the requirements and guidelines for the application of LCA analysis to a product or a service are provided by international standard, in particular by the ISO standard 14040 and 14044. This is the reference standard of LCA. And LCA is also a scientific method, because the method used to calculate the environmental footprint are scientific and are developed by research centers or university. But there's not only the standard ISO 14040, 14044. There are different methodologies to apply LCA. And for example, the product environmental footprint, the PEF methodology, is one of this method, LCA method. And the PEF method is developed by European Commission, based on the standard ISO 14040 and 14044. This methodology is used to apply the LCA to product and service, so to measure and communicate the potential life cycle environmental impacts of a product or service. And this methodology is published in the Commission Recommendation 9332 of 2021. This is an update of the previous Commission recommendation, so the previous methodology of PEF of the European Commission. But I said also that the life cycle assessment calculates the environmental footprint associated with all the stages of the life cycle of a product or service. So with the LCA, it's possible to calculate the environmental impact or the environmental footprint of all the stage of a product, from the raw material production and supply, so the production process, distribution process, retail, use, end of life treatment of the product, and the impact of the transport phase. So it's possible to say that LCA is a complete assessment of the environmental impact or environmental footprint of a product or service, because these impacts are associated with all the stage of the life cycle of a product and service. Moreover, the LCA is a quantitative procedure. So to conduct an LCA, to calculate the environmental impact of an LCA, it's important, it's necessary to compile a life cycle inventory. So it's necessary to collect quantitative data of all the material, raw material use, of all energy consumption, water consumption, waste output, emission into air, water, and so on. So we have to collect all this data. We have to collect a life cycle inventory in order to quantify the environmental footprint of a product, because LCA is a quantitative procedure. These inventories, this input-output data that we collect, are then translated in environmental impact by the scientific method we choose. But the LCA method doesn't calculate the impact only for one aspect, environmental aspect, but this LCA method can calculate the environmental impact of a product for different environmental aspects or environmental impact categories, such as climate change, eutrophication, acidification, ozone depletion, resource use depletion, water depletion, land use, ionizing radiation. So the LCA is a complete study, because are taking into consideration many environmental aspects and not just one, because, for example, climate change is only one aspect of the environmental problem. There are many different aspects of environmental impact. What is used to the LCA? What is used for? An LCA is useful for eco-design purpose and marketing purpose, so communication purpose. This is because the results, the LCA analysis is useful to identify the hotspots, so the source of significant impacts, environmental impacts. So it's possible to identify the process, the hotspots process along the life cycle of the product or the service. So the results of an LCA study can provide useful information for taking action and improving the environmental performance of product and service, of course, without compromising functionality, performance, and customer satisfaction. But as LCA, as I said before, is also important for marketing purpose, because with the LCA analysis, the results of the LCA analysis, it's allowed to draw scientific-based conclusions to support communication to all the stakeholders, and so to overcome also the market suspicion fueled by the greenwashing. So now we can move to the second subject of this presentation, so the environmental footprint applied to sporting events. And first of all, I will show you the data collection needed for applying the environmental footprint to sporting events. And first of all, it's important to collect data for the time frame of the sporting event. So we have to collect data for the pre-event period, the event period, and the post-event period. So we have to collect data for the period of the organization of the sporting event. We have to collect data about the process of during the course of the sporting event, and also after the event. So during the closing time of the sports event. And then which kind of data we have to collect for calculate the environmental footprint, environmental impacts of sport events. We have to collect data about infrastructure, the temporary infrastructure in particular. So we have to collect data about the construction of temporary infrastructure, but also the maintenance of temporary infrastructure during the event, of course. We have to collect data about the utilities and waste generation. So we have to collect data about the energy consumption, water consumption, waste generation, waste treatment. Then we have to collect data about the transport and accommodation, so the mobility of staff, of the supporters, of athletes, of course. The logistic of all the materials, so for example, the logistic of all the temporary infrastructure, all the food and beverage, so all the material consumption. We have to collect data about this logistic, and also the accommodation, so the number of nights spent by staff, supporters, and athletes in hotel. And then we have to collect data about the equipment. So we have to collect data about the production of athletes and staff equipment and clothing, the signage used for the sporting event. We have to collect data about the food and beverage, so the production and consumption of food and drinks during the event, during the event and the post-event. The consumption of packaging for the delivery for food delivery, and the information about data about the ticketing and promotional material. So the production of gadget, the consumption of gadget, promotional material, tickets, and passes. In this two slides, I will show you some example of data that we have in particular to collect for infrastructure, utility, food and beverage, and so on. So, for example, for infrastructure, for temporary infrastructure, it's necessary to collect data about the type for material use for the construction of the infrastructure, temporary infrastructure. So if it's steel infrastructure, wood, plastic, and of course we have to collect data about the kilograms of material use. So the kilogram of steel, of wood, of plastic, of the temporary infrastructure. the number of reuse of temporary infrastructure, because we have to divide the impact of infrastructure of the number by the number of the reuse, so the lifetime of the infrastructure. And we also have to collect the kilograms of cleaning and maintenance product used during the event to maintain the infrastructure. About utilities and waste, we have to collect data about the kilowatt hour consumed of electricity, the type or energy mix use, so national grid or photovoltaic, wind, hydroelectric, and so on. The cubic meters of natural gas or water consumption, the liters of fuel for energy generator set, if any. For transport and accommodation, we have to collect data about the average kilometers traveled by the subject involved, so the kilometers traveled by staff, spectator, supporters, or athletes. The type of means of transport used, so train, planes, cars, motorbikes, and so on. The average number of subjects per vehicle per private car, the number of nights in hotels spent by athletes, staff, spectator. And for food and beverage, we have to collect data about the type of food, the type of beverage, the kilogram of food and beverage consumed, the type and kilogram of packaging used for food distribution. So this is an example of all the data need to collect to apply an environmental footprint to sport events. Now I will show you the result of an environmental footprint applied to a multi-day sport event. This is the first LCA study in a multi-day sport event. In fact, in the literature there are some carbon footprint experience for multi-day sport event, but none of complete LCA. This is the environmental footprint applied to World Mountain Trail Running Championship in Innsbruck, Dubai 2023. This study has been carried out in a frame of games project funded by the European Commission with Erasmus Plus program. And this study has been carried out by the Sports Sustainability Research Group of the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies, that is the coordinating entity of the Games project. And of course, this study was made possible thanks to the contribution of the partner World Athletics, who put us in contact with the organization body of the World Mountain Trail Running Championship 2023. This championship was the duration of this championship was 10 days. So the 10 days was the event duration. 1,067 athletes participated, 239 athletes support staff and 262 general staff participated, and 50,000 supporters participated. 15,000 from outside of the supporters were from outside, with an average distance to from the place of origin of 600 kilometers. The main aim of the study was to understand the hotspots, so the most impactful process associated with the professional sports competition or World Mountain Trail Running Championship 2023, in order to identify opportunities to lower the impact, the environmental footprint of the championship. This study is based and take into account the product environmental footprint, so the PEF methodology developed by European Commission and published in the European Commission Recommendation 932 of 2021. The method we use to calculate the impact is the EF, environmental footprint 3.1 method. Also, this method was developed by the European Commission during the EF transition phase. And as you can see in the table on the right, this method taking into consideration 19 environmental impact or environmental aspect. So not all, it doesn't take into consideration only climate change, but also many other aspects of the environmental problem, like land use, ozone depletion, eutrophication, ecotoxicity, acidification, resource use, depletion, water use, and so on. We collect data of this section. You can see in these slides. So all this section have been considered including the system boundaries. So we collect data about temporary infrastructure production and transport, temporary infrastructure maintenance, utilities consumption, so energy, water consumption, food and beverage consumption for athletes, staff, and supporter, packaging for food and beverage distribution, equipment, clothing consumption for staff and athletes, ticket and promotional material, waste generation, waste treatment, the mobility of athletes, staff, and supporter, and the accommodation for athletes, staff, and supporters. All this inventory data have been collected directly by the organizer of the championship. And all the life cycle, this data, this inventory was modeled, taking into consideration the EcoInvent 3.9 and AgriBalize database. In this slide, in the table on the right, you can see the result of the environmental footprint applied to World Mountain Trail Running Championship in Innsbruck, Dubai 2023. As you can see, the results have been calculated for all the 19 environmental aspects. This is the result in the table. And we translate some of the result in user-friendly indicator. For example, we translate the total impact for climate change, and we translate the total impact for water use or water resource depletion. And this is the use of user-friendliness. It's important to let you understand better what does it mean, this total that you can see in the table. So the emission of 2,188 tons of CO2 equivalent are equivalent to the emission of a car traveling more than 20 million kilometers, or the consumption of 744,000 cubic meters of water is equivalent to the water need to fill 298 Olympic swimming pools. We also identify the relevant impact categories. So as I said to you before, the method, the environmental footprint 3.1 method calculate the impact for all the 19 environmental impact categories, but with a normalization and weighting process, which is a process developed by European Commission. With this process, it's possible also to identify the most relevant impact categories. Was identification, according to the PEF methodology, are those impact categories that together contribute to at least 80% of the single overall score. To calculate the single overall score, we have to aggregate the weighting impact that is you can see in this table. So for this championship, we calculate that the most relevant environmental aspect or impact categories are climate change, resource use fossil, photochemical ozone formation, resource use mineral and metals, particulate matter, acidification, eutrophication terrestrial. As you can see in the table, the climate change is only the 34% of the overall impact, so is a part of the impact of the championship, but there are other relevant impacts that, for example, the resource use fossil contributes about for the 19% of the overall impact. The photochemical reserve formation contributes about 7%, and so on. These are the hotspots, so the most relevant process, so the source of the most relevant source of impact, so the hotspot. And as you can see in the graph, it's possible to see that the 70% of the overall footprint is represented by the mobility of athletes, staff, and support. Most important are the contributions of the mobility of athletes, the 53% of the with the 53% of the contribution on the overall score. This is because there was many athletes coming from far away, so from USA, South Africa, South America, Australia, and so on. So this is why the mobility of athletes are so relevant. The impact of mobility of athletes is so relevant. But it's also relevant the impact of mobility of supporter, that is the 18%, 70.7% of the overall impact. The supporters use mostly cars to reach the event. So this impact is caused by the use of car by the supporters. It's also important the impact related to the accommodation. So the accommodation contributes for about 19% of the total environmental impact. If we exclude the mobility of athletes, so if we exclude this contribution of impact, we can see that accommodation and mobility of supporter are the most relevant, as we saw before, and the most relevant hotspot, but also the production of temporary infrastructure, the consumption of food and beverage, and the food and beverage packaging contributes for about 5%. Also, promotional material and staff clothing contributes for about 3% each. But remember, these percentages are not related to the overall impact, because we are excluding the most relevant life cycle stage of athletes' mobility. So to conclude, we can say that climate change, resource use fossil, photochemical reserve formation, resource use mineral and metals, particulate matter, acidification, eutrophication terrestrial are to be considered the most relevant impact categories for this championship, the World Mountain Trail Running Championship Innsbruck Dubai 2023. For all these relevant categories, environmental aspects, athletes' mobility, supporter mobility, and accommodation turn out to be the most impactful life cycle stage. On average, athletes' mobility contributes for about 60%, supporter mobility for about 15%, accommodation for about 15%. In terms of overall impacts, more than 70% of the overall footprint are represented by mobility, followed by accommodation. And since mobility represents the most impactful process, the possible improvement action should act in this aspect, so the mobility aspect. But even if mobility is seldom under direct control of the organization, in order to lower the environmental footprint, it can be useful to reduce the use of cars by the supporters in favor of a use of public transport, because this could contribute to reduce the impact of supporters' mobility. leading to a significant saving of CO2, since the supported mobility contributes for 70% on the overall impact. So thank you for your attention. I finish the presentation.
Thank you very much, Camilla. That was a really fascinating topic. So if you can all see, there is a Q&A bar in the top of your screen. If there are any questions for Camilla about her presentation, please pop your question into the Q&A bar, and I'll get through as many as I can after Kai goes through his element of the presentation. We should have about at least 10 or 15 minutes to go through questions at the very end. But without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor over to Kai, and to Kai to talk about his experience. Over to you, Kai.
Okay, so I will start with sharing my screen. So here we go. Okay, yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. And thank you for providing me the stage for giving these presentations. So my name is Kai Landwehr, or Kai Rasmus Landwehr, my second name. So I'm the head of marketing at myclimate Foundation, and I will start with a brief introduction of the organization I'm working for. And then I will also provide you with two examples of two events where we did the event carbon footprint, but I will focus rather on the measures than the measures that were conducted to reduce the existing CO2 footprint of the event, and also the learnings we got from these events for the next events in the future. So if you want me, so I can definitely send you the event footprint if they are published. I think they are, but I will focus more or less on the solution side or on the learning side. So yeah, starting with myclimate. So we are a Swiss-based foundation, an NPO. So our main office is in Zurich, but we have also branches in Germany and Austria, and we are serving clients basically from all over Europe and also from the North Americas. We do this with more than 160 employees right now, and we had a total revenue last year of 59 million Swiss francs. So we don't have, let's say, a rich donor in our back. So we do business like any other firm would do, but we are not allowed to make profit. So what are we doing? So we have three business pillars. The first one, it's called climate education. There it's about avoidance. So this is a project, the avoidance basically on CO2 emissions. So maybe just this important information. We are working in the area of climate protection. So our currency are more or less CO2 emissions, but we cover all the other environmental aspects that Camilla was touching on. So yeah, climate education. This is basically a project-run business. We have several projects focusing on school kids, but also on C-level people within companies, on apprentices, etc. And there, it's not about teaching climate change. It's more about talking about the impact of several measures, of several choices you have to take every day. So what does it mean if you decide to do your commuting with your bike instead of your car, etc.? So there it's about providing knowledge and empowering the people to take more and more environmental friendly decisions. The second part is called consulting and solutions, where we offer a large variety of services for companies, for organizations, for events. So there we have the product carbon footprints, we have corporate carbon footprints, event carbon footprints, LCA measures, but also we help companies and organizations to fulfill the reporting requirements, for instance, for the upcoming CSRD of the European Union. And this goes until the development of integrated climate or climate protection strategies for these companies. And last but not least, that is where we started with, is called climate protection projects. So we were offering offsetting, so the support of climate protection projects that save, mitigate, or remove efficiently CO2 emissions out of the atmosphere. But we said goodbye to the concept of offsetting or to the concept of climate neutrality. But still, we offer so-called beyond value chain mitigation. So I will touch later on this for existing carbon footprints you cannot reduce. For instance, when you plan and when you execute an event. So, and maybe the most important part on this slide is this area in the middle, the sweet spot. So this is the way we think it's most effective to do climate protection, but also to run a company or to run an event in the most environmental friendly way. So this is avoid as much as you can, is reduce as fast and as much as you can, but still at the same time take on responsibility for the rest of your emissions and support or try to reduce them, or in terms of carbon emissions, remove them somewhere else. Yeah, and oh, sorry, I have a technical problem. Here we go. And just this slide very, very briefly. So we try to understand your business or your event and try to find the most valuable touch points for climate action or for environmental action. And this can be calculation, this can be setting up of targets, this can be measures for your staff or for the spectators, this can be beyond value chain mitigation, or this can be, for instance, the yellow area support when applying for the Science Based Target Initiative or other global climate or environmental action initiatives. So you can do everything together with our company or with our organization, but you can also set spotlights on certain areas where you think you can really have an impact. Okay, the two examples I would briefly talk you through. The first one is the ESAF in Zug in the year 2019. So ESAF, so that stands for Eidgenössisches Schwing- and Älplerfest. So I guess 90 or 95% in the audience will not know what I'm talking about. It's a local sport here in Switzerland. It's kind of Swiss wrestling. So two people in a circle fighting against each other, doing kind of a wrestling. It's super, super big in Switzerland, but I think hardly somebody from another country know about this sport. However, this was the biggest sporting event in Switzerland in this year in pre-Corona time. So what did we do? So we were the official environmental or climate partner from the event. So we did the sustainability analysis and the calculation of the festival carbon's footprint. So it was a sport event, but it was a three days festival, so with a lot of other attractions around. Then what we also did, so they set themselves the goal at that time to become the first climate neutral Swiss Schwing- und Älplerfest. So they want to raise money for supporting projects that reduce the same amount of emissions that the event caused, based on our calculation. And they did it in a very specific way. They supported our project or our initiative, myclimate Cause Wikiea, which is kind of a matching mechanism. So there are contributions from the spectators, from the supporters. So for instance, we had a deposit concept. So you could buy your bottle of beer, for instance, and you had to pay a deposit of 2 Swiss francs, and you can go back and get your 2 Swiss francs back, or you could give this bottle or this deposit and donate it for the goal of climate neutrality of the events. And what is special about this concept is if somebody decided to do this, hey, take my bottle of beer, no worries at all, so I don't have to bring it back. So you got 2 francs from this spectator, and the organizing committee and the sponsors, they matched it, so they put another 2 francs into a fund, And from this fund, so they, at the end of the event, so they chose projects to support and to do beyond value chain mitigation. And the second very important part here at this event was we were involved in the creation of the sustainability report. And this report was not done for the sake of fulfilling reporting requirements. The idea was to create a guideline for the next events. So to focus, yes, on the numbers, but also to focus on the learning and highlight the key learnings, how to run this event like this, which happens every 4 years. So how to run an event like this in the most sustainable way. So, and this was really a very successful case from our side, because we had very, very positive feedback. So we conducted spectator surveys. So did you see the environmental measures? What do you think about it? Did you like it or not? And we got very, very positive feedback on the environmental measures. We had a large integration of public transport. So 90% of the more than 400,000 visitors arrived with public transport. So as this is basically a Swiss event, an event happening in Switzerland for Swiss people, so most of them also arrived with public transport or their own cars. So the distance was, I think, lower than the Trail Running Championship Camilla reported on. And with all the contributions, with the contributions by the spectators, with the contributions of the sponsors of the event, and with the contributions of the organizing committee, so the goal of being the first ever climate neutral Schwing and Erdbeerfest was achieved at the end. Okay. Yeah, so just to give you a brief example on the communication there on ground. So we had a lot of communication touch points there, especially for the deposit concept. So there was also stories for the spectators. So you can see the ice bear there as a symbol for the climate action on the event. You had the teams of people who were looking for the empty bottles or the empty glasses. And last but not least, we also had a huge balloon showcasing the volume of 1 ton of CO2. So I think Camilla mentioned it as well. So communication, especially towards the spectators, is key, and especially if you want them to contribute to the overarching goal, the overarching climate or environmental goal. So, and this is just a brief overview on this sustainability report. It's important. So the sustainability report was done in collaboration with another organization, which were focusing on the social part of sustainability. We did the environmental part, and at the end, I think it was about 50 pages, and it was used as the guideline for the next Swiss and Erdbeerfest in 2023. And finally, citation of the head of the organizing committee, and I think he elaborates pretty well that this event was a success, and one of the key success factors was the choice of the location itself, because usually this is an event taking place in the mountains, in, let's say, remote or at least rural areas. And this was the first time this event was conducted in a more urban surrounding. So, and that means it was easier to reach for the spectators, easier to reach with public transport, also for the athletes, and you had a lot of existing infrastructure there, so you don't have to use 30 or 40 lorries to bring a lot of infrastructure to a remote village in the mountains. So you had everything there, and this led to the result of a considerable low environmental footprint. The second event I will briefly touch on was the Men's World Floorboard Championships in 2022, happening in Switzerland, in Zurich and in Bern. And there were two initiatives. So there was first the real goal initiatives of the International Floorball Federation. And secondly, from the Swiss Federation, the Swiss Floorball Federation, Swiss Unihockey. There was the club calculator, and this was connected because the Swiss Unihockey Federation was the organizer of the World Championships. The green goal was an overall sustainability strategy. You can still find on the website. I have also the link here in my slides. What we did is we did the CO2 footprint calculation, so the LCA analysis of the event, and also we did the consulting, so how you can work with these numbers and how you could reduce the existing CO2 footprint. And due to several factors and also due to this CO2 footprint calculation, you had a very positive result compared to the last edition of the World Championships that happened in 2018 in Prague. So you had a minus 15% CO2 emissions per capita, means per athlete and per spectators, compared to the World Championships there in Prague. So you could reduce the CO2 footprint by visitors by half. And also, we had the integration mechanism of the defense and the supporters via the My Climate Cause We Care initiatives. And it's the same situation. You have existing infrastructure, you have a very good public transportation system, and you had the public transport ticket integrated in the ticketing, so that led to more than 80% of the spectators use the public transport. And there are the two main factors, I think Camilla mentioned it as well, for the CO2 or the climate footprint of an event. This is infrastructure, especially if you have to build new infrastructure, and this is transport and mobility of spectators and of athletes. And so a high percentage of spectators using public transportation helps a lot to reduce existing footprint. And the Swiss Unihockey, the so-called club calculator, was kind of the legacy of this event, because within the My Climate Cause We Care mechanism, there is one part that is about the so-called concept of climate neutrality, so the support of external project, but there are also funds for internal projects, for projects on ground, where you don't do the CO2 calculation, the CO2 reduction calculation, where you don't work together with standards, but where you raise money, where you raise funds for implement projects on ground, which have a legacy even after event, and which contribute to, let's say, a better environment or a better climate. And the legacy here, in case of the World Floorball Championships, was that we could build a web calculator, a CO2 calculator for floorball clubs. So you can imagine, so a floorball club, there is not that much knowledge about, and especially not only knowledge, but also time for thinking about the environmental footprint about. And this is an easy to use tool where you get a pretty good picture on the CO2 emissions from your club. And then from these results, you can think about reduction measures. So if you see, I think this is the case for most of the floorball clubs, that 90% of your emissions or more comes from the mobility, because everybody goes to the matches by their own car, then you can think about of car sharing measures, for instance. So, and this is the legacy coming from the World Floorball Championships, because this was where parts of the funds we raised together with the spectators of these events were used for. Yeah, so what were the success factors of this event, this event? So it was, we had a very determined partner. So it was not for them to doing a CO2 calculation to get the numbers or to fulfill reporting requirements. So they really want to have a starting point to think about how to do this event in a more sustainable and a more environmental and climate-friendly manner. Secondly, we started very, very early. So I think usually this is a no-brainer, but in reality, sometimes it's not. So we had the first discussion with them, I think 3 years in advance, and then we started the whole project 1.5 years in advance. So there was a lot of time to think about the measures, to also do the negotiations with Swiss public transportations providers, for instance, to reduce the emissions from the mobility area. So the starting early was a very important success factor. And then we had also a focus on the sensitization of the spectators, leading to these legacies. So there were other projects, collaboration with school classes, Swiss school classes, bringing them to the event and also tell them about the environmental measures, and also the collaboration with the clubs during this event and later on with the club calculator. And then I touched on this. So we could reduce a large chunk of these emissions by the integration of the public transport, and also by measures that provided supporters, for instance, from countries like Czechia, etc., to go together with a bus, with a coach, for instance, or with the train to come to Switzerland instead of using their own car. So this also contributed to the decrease of the CO2 emissions. And last but not least, and again, this was very important, so communication is the key for the acceptance, especially if you want the spectators also to contribute to the final results in an environmental perspective. So we did a lot of communications on ground, and so it worked, and it led also to the fact that we had a considerable less amount of waste and garbage during the event days compared to the other events, because there was a waste concept with a lot of communication, positive communication, and so the spectators happily joined. So coming to the end of my presentation, so I've just listed a few key takeaways. So first of all, yes, events are causing emissions, and they will do in the future. This is for sure, especially if you have the areas of transport and mobility and also the infrastructure. So it makes absolutely sense to do CO2 footprints, to do an LCA, but not for the sake of it or for the sake of number crunching. It is a starting point for effective reduction and avoidance measures for the event itself, working with historical data, but for events to come, working then with the real data. So to check if all the measures you have undertaken, if they really worked out or not. Then it's also a success factor for a more sustainable event is the involvement of the other stakeholders. So it's not only the duty or the task of the organizing committee or the event organizers. So you can easily introduce the sponsors, the visitors, the supporters, even the athletes, if you do this in a smart way. And this smart way could be a matching mechanism like the myclimate Cause We Care initiative, so that everyone could contribute to an overarching goal, because this also inspires everyone, because everyone likes to contribute to a good thing. If this could be done in an easy to do, in a comfortable or in a smooth way. And a main factor for the CO2 events resulting from a big sport event is really the choice of the event venue or of the hosting city. So if you go to a city which is easily connected to the public transport system, if you have existing infrastructure in place, etc., so this will definitely have a positive impact on your events emissions. So if you decide to give the let's say the Football World Cup to a small country where you don't have any kind of stadiums so far, then the result will be a pretty high CO2 footprint. So I think this is a given. And last but not least, so this is out of the scope of any LCA or PCF calculation, but you can think about the legacy. So what do you leave there? Is there a positive impact on the environment or on the climate after the event caused by the event? Yeah, thank you so much for your attention. And if you like to learn more, or if you want to get the specific event footprint calculations, so just get in touch. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you very much, Kai, for a really informative and interesting presentation. Now, we've got about 5 minutes left, and we do have a couple of questions, and we may not be able to get through them all. But there is one particular question that addresses both you, Camilla, and Kai. So maybe we'll go for that one, so you both have an opportunity to answer the question. And it's a very interesting question that comes from Paula, who's asking, It's quite a long question, so I'll try to break it down a little bit. So with the purpose of reducing emissions from sports events over time, first of all, is there a need for some kind of benchmark to start to compare from? And the second part of that question is, okay, given that there are so many one-off events, different organizing committees, different infrastructure, different countries, how would this benchmarking be possible? So first part of the question, should we look to benchmarking? And second part of the question is, when we look at environmental and carbon footprinting, how can we adapt those benchmarks to a very kind of fragmented sporting industry? Maybe Camilla, we can start with you with that one and then come to Kai afterwards. What's your view, Camilla?
Yes, it's not always possible to compare impact because there's not always, we don't have always a benchmark also for product, for service, and of course for sporting event, but it's not always necessary to compare the impact. It's necessary to remember the result of the studies, because we both said in our presentation that the mobility is the most important source of impact. So this is the reference, the reference that we have to keep in mind when we organize a sporting event, because it's the immobility of athletes, supporters, and the general staff that come the most important source of impact. So we can use the output of the LCA, the carbon footprint of applied to other sporting events to reduce our sporting event, even without comparing the impact.
Hi, what's your view on the need for benchmarking and if it's even possible within an industry like sport?
Yeah, so I think it's not possible or not doable from a pure scientific perspective, as Camilla said. But however, so usually you have previous events editions, so you have something to compare, and you can compare it on a per capita base. But I think that the most important thing is really to dive into the existing information and the existing data from previous events or from other events held maybe in different sports or different categories, and to find and to identify areas where you can reduce CO2 footprints in comparison, because I think this could be also, or this will be, especially here in Europe, a super important tool for the acceptance towards the acceptance from the society. Maybe also, so if you have to pitch, so if you could be the host city, for instance, of a World Cup or a European Championship. So if you think about the environmental footprint category, and if you can showcase, so I've looked to the data of the previous editions, and I have some ideas in place, or maybe I have, due to my city, some benefits in the environmental or in the climate perspective. So this could be a strong argument, so that at the end that you will become the host city. So this benchmarking from the communications perspective is super important. I think from the pure scientific perspective, there are a lot of ifs.
Okay, we have a couple of questions each for both of you, and I'll try and kind of group them in so we can get through all of them. Camilla, first of all, there are two questions for you. There's one from Christoph, who is asking if you could break down further the 19% impact of accommodation for the championships, for the World Mountain Trail Running Championships. And then a second question from Corinne, who's asking about specifically around table tennis equipment, if you know of any studies, life cycle assessment studies particularly around table tennis. So maybe we'll start with the first one, accommodation. Can we break down that 90% further? What does that look at in particular?
The impact from accommodation?
Yes.
Okay, so for the accommodation, we use an EcoInvent database, so it's a secondary data, it's not primary data. because it's difficult to collect data about the accommodation. The organization collect data only about the night spent in hotel by supporter, athletes, and the staff. So we use the EcoInvent 3.9 database. In this database, collect data about the construction of the hotel, so everything that need to build a hotel, also for the furniture. It's considered also the energy consumption per night, water consumption per night, and so on. So it's not a primary data, but it's a secondary data, and the EcoInvent calculate the impact for one night for guests. So we use this kind of information.
And a second question from Corinne was around table tennis equipment. Do you know, have you heard of any studies that specifically look at the sport of table tennis and its equipment?
Table tennis equipment, it can be the racket, but you have to divide the number of use of the racket, because you don't use the racket for only one championship or events. The clothing of the athlete, but also for the racket, you have to divide the impact of the clothes used by the athletes for the events, such as we have to. For World Mountain Trail Running competition in Eastbrook, Dubai, we calculate the impact of the running shoes, but we divide the impact by the number of reuse of the running shoes. So you don't have to calculate all the impact of the equipment if the equipment is used more than one time.
Okay, thank you. Kai, we have 3 questions to finish off with you. 2 quite quick ones and one which maybe is a little bit more involved. The 2 quick ones, Kai, are from Alessio. Alessio is asking, do you use life cycle assessment software, or do you base your studies on greenhouse gas protocol? And the other question, quick one from Rika, is the club CO2 calculator available for other sports clubs, or could it be made available as a white label solution? So first of all, software against greenhouse gas protocol, what methodology, what do you use?
Yes, also we use software solutions, and we also use we do the calculation according to the greenhouse gas protocols, but we could also do this according to other standards. And we have a software solution. Wouldn't help you that much if I give you the name. It's called Smart 3, but. However, yes. So the simple answer is yes. We do software calculation, but we are still working on newer versions and more compelling versions of the software. So this was the first question.
And the second was around: is it available for? Could the CO2 calculator is available for other sports clubs?
Very important question, because we started with this club calculator. We had announced it's just 10 or 14 days ago a similar project with the German Football Federation. We built together a club calculator for football clubs, which goes more or which goes deeper than the club calculator for the floorball. And we're also working with Swiss Olympic for a club calculator. So there is a lot of knowledge there. So these are collaboration, or these are existing projects together with existing partners. But this is, first of all, it is doable, and second, I think it would be a great idea to find a white label solution. But first, we have to discuss this with the existing partner, or we have to find a new partner where we could think about a white label solution, and then we have to talk about the scope. So I think the requirements of a table tennis club, for instance, will be way more different than compared to a rugby club, for instance.
And the final question, Kai, there's a question here from Hannah who's asking, she's curious about the rationale behind forming a partnership in which one entity focuses on environmental assessment while another concentrates on social and governance assessment, and looking at the way things are moving in Europe now around CSRD, where all 3 aspects are put together. What's kind of the rationale behind that kind of that setup?
Yeah, so the residual is it's a basic one. So we are experts in the area of environmental sustainability. So we are not experts in the social and the governmental part. So yeah, we could try to find the right people and also to integrate this to the offer. But there are many great organizations around with way more expertise, with year-long of expertise outside that couldn't do this better than we could do. And I think the only organizations so far that offer all the three areas are the big consulting firms, so PwC, for instance. And yes, you can choose to work together with them, or you can focus more on specialized organization. But the important part is that you set up a project so where these organizations really talk together, discuss together, and then, let's say, bring their knowledge and their experience together for an even better result than you have this in a one-stop shop solution.
Thank you very much. I think we'll bring the webinar to an end there. I'm sure if anyone wants to contact Camilla and Kai to talk further about their presentations or about any topics around that, I'm sure you'll be able to contact them via LinkedIn or other means. Thank you very much to everyone for their questions today. There were some really interesting questions to finish off our presentation, and of course a big thank you to Camilla and Kai for their wonderful presentations and some really interesting talking points. Our next webinar, we haven't got a date for our next webinar yet in the Green Games project, but we will be focusing on decarbonisation guidelines and environmental best practices that we've developed as a group. So look out for that. We'll be sharing a date and a time for that in the coming weeks. But apart from that, just again, thank you to all of you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Have a nice rest of your day. Goodbye.